No, because now it's on recording, retard. Do it.
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, theism is a belief in a god. What's wrong with that?
Okay, the belief in a god. So what's the difference between theism and deism?
What's the difference between theism and deism? Well, theists, for example, would believe that gods, or for example, majority of like traditional theists would believe that God was revealed to us through like, for example, physical experiences. And deism, for example, theists would believe that God is not revealed to us through physical experiences, but rather we can establish that God exists through logical reasons, all the scientific facts in the universe.
Do you think any theist has to believe that God has already revealed himself?
I don't think this is a necessity, but I think there's a difference between traditional theism and deism, as I've already explained a while ago.
Is there a difference between monotheism?
I'm
just trying to show him why he was so retarded when he said he's a theist.
He's not gonna
saying that I'm retarded is not
okay. I mean, honestly, Apollo, are you open to being convinced, or are you just gonna try and argue against me, even if you know you're wrong?
I mean, you're the one trying to argue against my definitions.
Because your definition was retarded. You can't say you're a theist and then say the thing you're arguing for is a metaphysically simple thing. I'm trying to prove that you're retarded, to be honest. Because there's a lot of people in VC. I just want them to know that you're retarded.
So what's the problem with that?
What are you talking about?
So you're critiquing me for arguing against you, but your goal here is not to learn; it's just to prove I'm retarded.
No, because I'm right. That's the point. Anyone can look these things up. When you say you're a theist, and then you tell me that you believe in a god defined by simple metaphysicity, that doesn't believe in theism.
You're saying to me that your goal here is to prove I'm retarded because you know you're correct. I can also say the same thing. My goal is to do the same thing because I know I'm correct.
And then that's cool, but you're wrong. So that's as simple as that is.
But I mean, I can say that's cool,
but you're still wrong, because I can show you what theism is defined by. I can show you that there's a contrast to deism, and then I can show you when you're a theist, you can't say it's just a metaphysical simplicity, because then you don't have the properties necessary to call yourself a theist.
There's a reason why when atheists enter like conversations about God and whether God exists or does not exist, they usually ask the theist or whomever they're arguing against, what's your definition of God? And that's because there are multiple different definitions of gods and different criteria of what God is.
No, because hold on, there is a specific criteria for theism, though, one that differentiates it from something like deism. Correct.
Well, I've already explained the differentiation between traditional theism and deism. So
no, what you explained was revealance. We both know that there exist theists who do not believe that God has revealed himself. For instance, Dark Dawkins and whatever the fuck. So at that point, that definition doesn't make sense. That contrast does not make sense. However, when you tell me that your God is defined by a metaphysical simplicity, that doesn't tell me anything in either theism or deism, because at that point, you're not even supporting an entity that has the properties necessary to be supported.
Could I ask you a question?
What?
Could I ask you a question? Don't you believe that in theism or deism, these persons who adhere to these worldview agrees that God grounds the universe?
I couldn't hear you. Say it again.
Here a second. Give me 1 second.
Bro, let me just put Apollo on his little neck.
W Moose. Oh shit! I had this one. My bad. Look, Moose W.
Bro, we did not
Why are you losing to Apollo?
That's funny. A mí me gusta ir a la escuela en la mañana.
Yes, what's the topic you're
So we were supposed to be doing theism, and then his definition was like a metaphysical simplicity. So I'm telling him how that's such a retarded thing to say.
It's Apollo. He will never.
Yeah, it's like semantic shit right now. But hopefully it'll end up being an actual topic.
I got you.
This is why you don't debate Apollo.
Whoa.
Let's do it. Someone make a poll in chat. Who's gonna win, me or Apollo? Let's see.
BB's gonna body. BBW Apollo L.
Actually,
Who's gonna win? Moose.
Right now.
Make one for me versus Apollo.
Yo,
James Drummond.
What's up,
I don't think you understand the definition of implied. If I tell you that something is implied,
I can't hear you. Wait, Nero,
like
let me
for a situation.
Let me hear D1 real quick. Let me hear D1 real quick.
Hey, you can please.
I got you. Alright, D1, go on.
So I'm duck checking Octane, he's ducking me. So if he doesn't,
I'm not ducking you. I just told you.
Okay.
So yeah, if you duck check him right now, and is it for the group shit, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if he leaves the VC while you're in here and you call them out, then you get the points.
Alright, bet.
I literally said I'll debate him.
Yeah, get a topic.
Okay, I do crosswords.
We have to do.
Okay,
debate
I'll
after
take
debate.
I'll take
You have to. You're in line. Hello?
Someone gave BB perms? Who did that?
I own the server. This is my idea. The server was my idea, bro.
I rest my point. Anyway. Everyone but Dan, or what's his name doing? Hello. Oh, there he is, okay. Invite to speak here.
Aki and D1 do have to debate after you debate Apollo, if you guys do.
Why they delete the VC? They can debate down there, can't they?
Yeah, they can.
Okay.
But, like...
Okay.
If they want to move down.
Yeah. Paul, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so we can do one of two things. We can either keep debating on which definition, or you can adhere to a more contemporary definition. We can just debate that. Which one do you want to do?
I guess the former.
Okay, cool. So
my definition of theism or whatever was incoherent. What's the incoherency?
So the incoherency is that theism, as a, I guess, term, has certain aspects to it that must be fulfilled to say you're taking a theist position. When you say that your definition of God in the theistic framework is that of a metaphysical simplicity, you're not telling me anything about theism, you're just telling me something about supernaturalism.
Of God, sorry, can you hear me?
Yep. I hear you.
If my definition for God is just this thing which you just disbelieve in or you don't agree with, then essentially it's a theistic position, because if theism is just simply the belief in some God or a God, right? And my definition for God involves these properties, and I believe in these properties which I think constitutes God, then that would be a theistic position, analytically speaking.
Wait, is your God maximally great?
God maximally great? You think that's a requirement for it to be a God?
No, but you said it holds the properties. Those would be the properties, right?
Well, the properties that I described, right, which does not include omnipotence.
What properties would it include?
I mean, it just described my properties, are the properties that I ascribe to what God actually is, and you actually believe that this definition is incoherent.
Well, what you told me was a metaphysical simplicity. That's correct, right?
Yeah, something along the lines.
Okay,
yes.
That says nothing about hierarchy, though. That's the issue. That's why your maximally usually comes in. Because if it can have somebody above it...
It does to some extent.
What does it say about hierarchy?
Well, the thing is that this thing would be a per se cause. You know what a per se cause is, right?
It could be what?
A per se cause.
A per se cause?
Yeah, this per se cause grounds this hierarchical causal chain. In Aristotelian metaphysics, it's just like basically cause which exists in virtue of effect which exists in virtue of cause. And this thing is usually deemed as something which are metaphysical with a higher metaphysical status in comparison to what these types of causes actually grounds.
Okay,
so yes,
it
does in fact.
You're saying so much.
Pause. It does in fact hold metaphysical status.
What we have to go back to per se cause, because you're gonna have to tell me a bit about that before we move on. So tell me about a per se cause.
I just defined it, did I not?
No, you said really quickly and then you rambled into a new point. So we're going back to what is a per se cause?
But I mean, if we're not tracking short. So per se cause is just simply a cause which exists in virtue of an effect and an effect which exists in virtue of a cause. Kind of like a codependence relationship, right?
Okay.
This is kind of different from a per accidens cause, for example.
Wait, hold on. If it's a codependent relationship, then that God is not at the top of the hierarchy because there's something switching causal relations with it.
Well, no, actually, because of the fact of the matter, which is a per se cause in this context would just simply be that which embodied some level of simultaneous causation for the whole causal chain.
Simultaneous causation in the whole causal chain? What are you talking about?
So basically, just to clarify what I'm saying to you, so let's say, for example, you agree with unified objects existing, right?
What's a unified object?
Composite objects.
Composite? Yeah, sure, composites exist.
Yes, like for example, a tree, like when you look at the tree, it's comprised of atoms,
parts,
molecules,
yes, I know how that works.
Yes. Yeah, the point of the matter is, this cause, as I described, would just be the ultimate ground for all of these unified objects which exist in the universe. So
there is an ultimate ground for all composite objects.
Yes.
And this thing exists at the top of the hierarchy.
I don't see I can describe incoherence to a definition when definitions don't really bear anything on reality.
What are you talking about? No, I'm talking about what you're defining right now. So there exists this initial cause, right? This thing you're saying exists at the top of the hierarchy, right?
Yes.
Okay, and this thing has
the ultimate ground for all things that are unified.
The ultimate ground for all composites. Ultimate ground for all composites. This thing has properties that put it at the top, such as omnipotence, omnibenevolence, etc., correct?
I said.
Yes?
I never even talked about omniqualities. You just draw man at the moment.
That's why it's a question. I didn't tell you what you said. I'm asking you a question.
Well, you just made a statement, so I assume that you're saying that. Well, that's what I said a while ago.
Well, when it ends with correct, that means it's a question. But anyway, we can go on this. So, does it have all the omni properties, yes or no?
Wait, hold on there a second. Give me a sec. Someone just called me.
One of your e-girls? Bro, it's kind of crazy how the debate community is more active than the packing community. That's kind of crazy. I'm not gonna lie.
I mean, I guess it gets a little stale when all your APO plugins eventually get around everybody, huh?
I have to let up Liter Sama. Let me find him.
I'm back. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so just to confirm, Moose, you just believe that my definition is incoherent, right?
I don't know. I just don't think it's God. That's the issue. Like, I don't want to argue against something that can.
That just means you have a different definition. That's the whole point.
Well, no, I don't think it can be applied as God. It's
well,
theism.
so what's the logical contradiction in my definition?
It's no logical contradiction. Okay, the issue is when God is defined.
Well, then why would you say it can't be God?
Hold on, because it can't be. So when God is defined as something very specific, and the thing that you define as God has to do with a metaphysical simplicity, that which can be transcended in a hierarchy, it is not God. So the issue
why
is
you're
right
saying
now.
yourself, dude. So the point of the matter is, you're saying to me that my definition of God, you're listening, right? You're saying my definition of God is incoherent.
Just leave the community.
But you're just saying there's a different definition, which this definition does not correspond with. That doesn't explain anything on the table, dude.
Which is why right now we're going over it. So you agreed that what you're defining is the ultimate ground for all composites, and now we're moving on to, does it have omni properties, yes or no?
It doesn't need to. That's the thing. And I'm saying to you that if you're gonna say to me that a God requires omniproperties, then you're basically saying that there's an objective definition of God. Objective definitions don't exist because there's individual utterances, which explains what we as thinking agents are thinking about when you're using a particular word.
Okay,
if these things don't map onto reality, wait, one more thing.
These things don't map onto reality.
Not
Fucking nerd. Push your glasses up when you speak.
Definition.
Speak with some
what you just said made no sense, because the issue is our definitions don't need to correspond to reality. We can have prerequisites to apply properties to things, such as the term God. When we talk about what it means to be the top of the hierarchy, we talk about the fact that nothing can transcend it or be above it, and if it does not have maximally great properties, then things can be above it, and therefore it's not at the top of the hierarchy, and therefore it's not God.
You're just reiterating your position, dude. So
this is what it means to be God.
Could you listen? You want to learn something? We get there with two different definitions. You're simply critiquing my definition because it does not correspond to this definition that you see other people use. That does not demonstrate in the logical.
Plans, you live in a third world country, bro.
I'm thinking about everybody else when I use this word. It's very simple. If definitions are just individual utterances which subsist and does not exist in the real world, then you can't critique a definition for being incoherent. There's no actual logical bar for that statement. You're retarded.
This has nothing to do with what we are creating definitions for. The term God means something, yes or no?
It means something, but we have different meanings of this word. Very
Can
simple.
God be a bug? Can God be a bug? Can the term God just mean bug?
It can be, it can be anything. Like, it's just a word, dude.
Nice. So that's great. I'm glad I'm debating someone who can't come up with their own actual statuses.
Any actual person who knows what the fuck they're talking about would agree with me.
Terms have prerequisites.
You can define
when we talk about what it means to be God, as you define yourself, we talk about a being.
Oh my god, this dude.
That has transcended the physical world.
Say something?
He exists supernaturally at the top of the hierarchy, in no contrast to another entity, since he's the very top, which usually entails necessary properties.
It's just another person's definition of God. That's all it is.
What do you? Now, this is contemporary literature.
Wait, pause. Moose. If this definition is more used, then okay, cool. Don't care. It doesn't mean this definition is more coherent than the other definition.
Can I define God as me?
It just means it's something. It just means it's a higher. The only thing it means.
If I define God as me, is that coherent? Is that coherent? Defining God as me.
Defining God as you. You mean, yeah, you can define God as anything. You can define any word as anything. Doesn't
That's
mean
not what we're
anything to you.
talking. We're not talking about just assigning the word. We're talking about types of terms and what they apply to. The reason you don't call God me is because we have a different specific prerequisite for what it means to be God. Usually,
No, it's
we
not
apply.
inferred,
Hold
dude.
on. It is not inferred. We have specific prerequisites. This thing must be the top of the hierarchy in the supernatural world. He must transcend the physical world. He must be the initial cause, if you want to call it that, via Aquinas. I don't even remember what his name is. Aquinas, right? We have specific prerequisites for what it means to be called God. Now, saying I'm God or saying a bug is God is not only not informative, it doesn't adhere to the prerequisites that are usually applied. So when you tell me that God is defined as a metaphysical simplicity, it doesn't make sense because there can be things above that metaphysical simplicity and there can be things equal to that metaphysical simplicity. So that thing cannot be God.
All right. Look, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so I just made sure to switch my voice in case my phone died or some shit. But either way, hold up. So basically, if your position is just that this definition is less used than this other definition I present, then okay, there's no disagreement upon that. The disagreement stems from when you're going to claim that my definition is incoherent. It is not incoherent. When you're saying something is logically incoherent, you're either
Hello?
The fucking Modelo died. That's fucking
Okay, well, now that he cut out, I'll take this. It's not just about differing definitions, right? He said, I will take theism. Theism has prerequisites, things that would differentiate it, for instance, for deism or pantheism or naturalism. The difference is not that there exists a supernatural entity alone, because then you can just be a supernaturalist, but rather there exists a supernatural entity at the top of the hierarchy and who holds ultimate control over the physical world. That's my clarification. Yeah, I guess God just didn't want Apollo hitting him like that, so he muted his mic. It's rough. Well, should I say anything else before I get interrupted again? What should I say?
Bro, put the batteries back into his fucking flip phone. Be careful.
I didn't laugh at that. That's not on recording. But what else is there? No, that's basically it, right? You said he was taking theism. You can't really say theism and then say you're taking some metaphysically simple thing. We'll wait for him then.
I want to chat if you
okay, so basically, so just to confirm, Moose, I'm sorry for leaving a while ago. Just to confirm, your whole position is just that my definition is logically incoherent, right?
I don't like applying terms like illogically. It's just incoherent based on what we know to be theism and the concept of God. Yeah, according to it, sure.
So it's just incoherent based on what you know about this thing. But if based on what we know, it also encompasses these definitions, which may or may not be less used by people with basic subject matter, then I don't think your arguments would actually work.
It's not about popularity. It's about there exist prerequisites. Your definition has to fit that prerequisite, or you can't call it theism.
So you're saying this is necessary for this thing to exist, for you to be a theist?
Then
why would you say
there are prerequisites for you to say that you're talking about a theistic position because theism has certain entailments that come with it. Right? These are the things that differentiate it from deism and pantheism and supernaturalism. The difference being that there exists a supernatural entity of the highest order, usually, but not always, with maximally great properties. And this thing exists at the top with no contrast to itself. That's why people don't really like theistic activism.
So, could I say something? So, do you think theism, if theism is just simply the only essential property of theism as regards the subject matter, just the belief in God, right? Do we think God, for God to be God, he has to be the great, or you have to assign omniqualities to this being?
Omniqualities? I'd say usually we do.
Yeah, so usually we do, I guess, does not entail, it's a prerequisite, right?
Well, no,
because I've already told you different views which describes God to be totally different. And
sure, because I told you that's not the prerequisite.
Out of my ass.
The prerequisite comes from being at the top of the hierarchy, right? Usually, because we assign things like maximally great properties, like the omniqualities, because that means that you can't be transcended by any form. That doesn't mean, however, that you can't not have omniproperties and still have nothing above you.
You're saying that doesn't mean we can't have. Okay, repeat the last part.
You can be the top of the hierarchy and still not have maximally great properties. We just usually assign maximally great properties because that ensures the top of the hierarchy.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with this. It depends though. Like for example, some people would say like some people actually has this criteria of omnipotence, which basically is based upon this being having the greatest power in a particular hierarchy, right? But I mean, it depends on the actual person debating the subject matter. No need to actually go over this. But when you're saying that it's a prerequisite for me to actually agree that this being that I'm presenting to exist, which is God, has to have omniqualities, then what you're basically affirming indirectly is that theism, a prerequisite for theism, is omniqualities, is the belief in a being with omniqualities, which I disagree with.
No,
and theism, the only prerequisite. Wait, one more thing. The only prerequisite, I guess, based on the standard definition of theism, is that you believe in God. The belief in a God. That's the only thing that exists, or that's the only thing that's a prerequisite, right?
No,
I don't see how it's a prerequisite for me to define this being that I believe in to actually be some being which has omniqualities, which is what they're presenting right now on the table.
Okay, so I never said you have to have omniqualities, right? What I said was, if you want to find a contrast between theism, deism, pantheism, supernaturalism, the thing that theism has at its very center would be the fact that there exists a supernatural entity transcendent over the physical world with power over the physical world that exists at the top of the supernatural hierarchy. Right? Now, you can find other contrasts with that. For instance, by your position, if there exists a metaphysical simplicity, this thing cannot be the top of the hierarchy because it's metaphysically simple, which means that composite objects would be above it in terms of ontological status.
So you're saying that composite objects are above it in ontological status because what exactly?
Well, I mean, it's pretty simple. More things are greater than one thing. Like properties are
more things are greater than one thing.
Yeah. It's pretty simple.
So in the metaphysical sense, you wouldn't say that something which grounds all these things and causes these things to actually be unified and exist in the actual world is things which I guess are more or have a higher metaphysical status in comparison to these composite objects.
What? Metaphysical? Okay, so here, the issue is, I don't think that thing can have a metaphysical status here prior to providing it. Because if it's ontologically low, then that means that things are going to be ontologically higher, which means it can't ground things ontologically higher than itself.
Well, you're saying it's ontologically low in terms of the amount of things which comprise this thing. You're not saying it's ontologically low in comparison or when it comes to the actual power of this thing and its relevance.
If this thing is ontologically simple, how is it creating composite objects and ruling over them in terms of like having that power?
How is it creating so that's just an argument against my view, which you can just debate on that.
Well, it's more of a, how do I put this? It means you're not at the top of the hierarchy, which means the definition works. But sure, we can go off the view.
Well, so basically, are you trying to say that composite objects has to be explained only by composite objects?
Yeah, that would make sense.
Well, the thing with that is, if that is the case, then there would be an infinite regress of composite objects explaining each other, which would not present any sufficient reason as to why these things are composites. So, so then we'd have to bite the bullet and then say these things aren't actually composite objects, but rather they're just arbitrary aggregates.
Simple things combine to make composite objects. Composite objects can split apart to make simple objects. But if you have one simple fundamental object, that thing does not have a composite necessary to break down.
So all that's explaining is that a simple object is irreducible from a metaphysical standpoint. Sorry, but that's not explaining that this thing necessarily has to have a lower degree of ontological power. Because the point of the matter is, you just said a while ago that every unified object, any composite object which exists in the universe, has to be explained by another composite object or unified object. And I just explained to you that if we're to go under that worldview, then there would be an infinite regress of composite objects explaining each other. And this infinite regress of hierarchy chain would present an insufficient reason for these objects to be composite to begin with. Do you understand that?
Multiple single objects, multiple simple objects can come together to create composite objects, or a composite object can split apart to create multiple simple objects. The issue is, at your worldview, you have one fundamental simple object. This can do neither, so therefore it doesn't have the ontological priority.
Is that a true dichotomy?
Its power. Well, yeah, I would say so.
Is it a true dichotomy?
Sure.
What's the argument for that?
The argument is two things: 1 plus 1 equals 2, 2 minus 1 equals 1. 1 with nothing else cannot equal anything because you don't have anything to add or subtract from it.
So how this analogy correlates with this situation? We're just saying that this thing can create more composite objects because of the fact which is this is not composite.
Because 1 and 1 makes 2 means two simple things can make a composite object. 2 minus 1 equals 1 means a composite object can subtract and make a simple object. But if you have one fundamentally simple object and nothing to combine or subtract it with, then you're left with one object. You cannot create or.
So the issue with that is when you're using like this mathematical example to actually try to correlate it with this example, whereas I've already explained to you the difference. So the difference would be the point of the matter, which is you can claim a unified object to be a unified object if it is only explained by unified objects. Because if it is, for example, look at the tree, for example. A tree is something which we would agree with to be a unified object. It's comprised of subatomic particles and so on, which actually constitutes the haze of this tree. Now, if this is only explained by unified objects, and these unified objects, which explains this tree, is also only explained by unified objects, then what we're left with is an infinite regress of unified objects. If there's an infinite regress of unified objects, there's no endpoint, and there's no actual sufficient reason as to why these unified objects we categorize to be unified or even unified to begin with. So what that would leave us with? Wait, one more thing. What that would leave us with? Would be the fact of the matter, which is, if there's no sufficient reason for these quote-unquote unified objects to be unified objects, then what follows from that is that these things are perhaps not even unified, and they're just arbitrary aggregates. If they're arbitrary aggregates, then that opposes it being unified objects, as we define it as. So you're left with one situation where you have to bite the bullet and then say that under this worldview, whereas unified objects only explain unified objects are only explained by unified objects. Right, you'd have to agree that these quote-unquote unified objects aren't even unified objects, and they're just arbitrary aggregates. But you can't agree on this because then that would be into like some concession in your worldview.
Okay, you're saying a lot of things you don't understand. Okay, so first of all, when you have a tree, it's made of parts. These parts can digress into simplicity. That's true. What I'm saying is, when you have a fundamental first cause, and this first cause is creating something that's not simple, or itself is simple, then the issue is that thing cannot make anything that is not divinely simple, because at that point you have a first cause. This cause is divinely simple, and it's creating something that is not divinely simple via its power. Because it has multiple parts by this point, its parts create a complex object. That means that your fundamental thing can no longer be simple. Now, the original notion of divine simplicity, as
there's a contradiction in the fundamental thing.
No, this is important. This is important. I have to lay this out to you. The traditional notion of divine simplicity that you can argue for if you want to, but I'm not willing to argue against, is that there exists a simplicity defined as the identity of God, but that his parts are individual of himself, but he can still utilize them. Right? Think of them as like powers or abilities that are not inherent to him, but are still utilized by him. If you want to do that, that's fine, but you can't say there's only a metaphysical simplicity as the initial first cause, because that wouldn't make sense.
Well, I'm just saying this metaphysical simplicity is the explanation for all unified objects.
What is the property that allows him to create the unified objects, or allows him to reign over the unified objects?
I don't know the property as regards. Hold on there a second. Someone is calling me again. Hold up, be right back.
Okay, you are not that popular. Who's the strongest character at Marineford? Strongest at Marineford was either Whitebeard or Sengoku, or you could say the Admirals. I don't know, maybe Whitebeard? Akainu? I don't know. Akainu didn't do too well. Sir, he's the world's strongest pirate, which means that he's over Mihawk, which means Mihawk is over someone else.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so basically, you asked me what is the property which actually causes this simple thing to actually create composite things. I don't think this is actually relevant, because even if I was to be unaware of the actual thing which actually causes this simple thing to create these composite things, if we can establish a syllogism which entails that these things, if only to be explained by composite things, would establish that this thing would be an arbitrary aggregate, then for one, or arbitrary aggregate, then you can't even make the claim that these things are unified objects, right? And the only explanation that would have, other than the fact of the matter, which is these unified objects are being explained by unified objects, which, as I've explained to you, results in a absurd conclusion, would be that these unified objects are explained by something which is divinely simple, as you may call it, right? The process as to how exactly this divinely simple thing creates these other composite things is irrelevant. I don't need to know this process to know that this thing is entailed in virtue of our prior acknowledgments in this discourse that we're currently having.
Okay, so that's where the issue comes from. If this thing is divinely simple, and this thing does not have external properties like someone under a divine simplistic contemporary view would have, where God can reach and use like omnipotence as a property that isn't of himself, of his identity, but rather something that he can unify, then you have no ability to say that your divinely simple thing can have power over or create another object or the natural world at all. That's where the contrast comes in, and that's why you have an inability to prove that a divinely simple thing.
So when you say it creates these things, so wait a second, let's look at that. So you're basically saying that this thing can't create these things into existence. Like, it can't bring these things into existence.
Yeah.
Well, and the argument for this is just based upon the fact that you just believe that there's a metaphysical contradiction in a simple thing creating a more composite thing.
If you're divinely simple, and you're not saying that there's something like God going on in divine simplicity where he reaches out for other properties, then you have no properties that would allow you to do so, no.
Well, I'm not denying that he's reaching out for the properties, nor am I, again, saying something else. I'm just saying that regardless of whether I know the actual process towards him creating, let's just identify this being as God for the sake of the conversation, even if you disagree on it. Let's say this being is the explanation for all composite objects which we know of in the universe, right? If it is the case that if composite objects, if composite objects were to be only explained by composite objects, that would entail an infinite regress of composite objects explaining each
really
other, and these composite objects would explain each other would explain each other.
I explained what
there's
I meant
no sufficient reason.
I explained what
Excuse me?
Yeah, I explained what I meant by that. So, like, your tree example wasn't sufficient because I was saying that in reference to God. So when I say that divine, or was it like, obviously, if you have a tree, you can regress that down into simplicities, all right? And those simplicities can make it with each other to create the tree. But when you have a fundamental first cause, and this fundamental first cause is creating something that is not also divinely simple, then at that point, you necessitate complexity to create complexity.
So repeat the last part real quick.
Okay.
The fundamental first cause.
If your fundamental first cause is divinely simple and it doesn't have any external properties, you're reaching out for, utilizing, whatever, then it must not be able to create complex things. And because it's the first cause, it can't, let's say, combine with the thing it created, because, right, it's obviously transcendental in the hierarchy over any form or thing that it would be creating. Then that would just lead to a chain of divinely simple things, which obviously don't exist today.
Okay, so you're saying that my worldview entails that there would have to be a chain of divine simple things.
I'd say so, yeah. I wouldn't hold that hard to it, but I would say so, yeah.
Okay, so I don't think it really logically follows, for one, at least if we're going to say it's an entailment. But the point of the matter is, I am saying to you, I feel as if I'm repeating myself, but I'm saying to you that the thing is that I don't think you're establishing like an actual metaphysical contradiction. I think what you're saying is that when you present like the mathematical example, for example, like something that is irreducible can't create something or can't cause something higher than it in virtue of itself, right? I think in that example, I guess it kind of like confines the, like, obviously we're talking about a divinely simple being creating composite things. That's the reductive for your argument, right? So if we compare these two situations, in the example about the mathematical numbers, right, there's no other way the mathematical number could actually create or cause something higher than itself. But I don't think this would necessarily follow in this example, considering that this divinely simple thing, or this metaphysically irreducible property or object of the universe, which sufficiently explains everything that we know of to be unified objects, doesn't necessarily possess the same exact qualities as just something as simple, or not as simple, but something else like a mathematical number or object, for example, like 0, 1, and so on.
Okay, I don't think you really understood
what 0 was.
No, I understand what you said. It was just a lot of verbosity. But I understand what you said in the sense that you're saying like the math analogy didn't work, but the math analogy was supposed to show you that 2 is the representation of a composite object and 1 is divinely simple, right? If your fundamental thing is 1, then and it has no power to create a 2, then that thing will be 1 forever. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so therefore, if the fundamental first cause is divinely simple, we would have no composite object today or anything created in general. Let's suppose it is.
Well, the issue with that argument is that basically the conditional statement you're affirming here is that if this simple object has no power, then a composite object can't be derived from the simple object. So what you have to demonstrate here is the truth without the first premise. You have to want the first premise, P1.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. If something is divinely simple, it doesn't have properties associated with it, which means it doesn't have the power necessary under any potence of claim that it can make these things.
So you're saying that power is confined to other composite properties or composite properties?
Well, no, power is a property, and because this thing is divinely simple and it has no properties, it doesn't have power, therefore it can't create things, therefore it's divinely simple, and therefore it doesn't work as
when we say this thing is metaphysically irreducible or has no composite properties, all it means is that there are no parts. Like there are no. When I say parts, I mean like, for example, there are not more than one part of this thing. It's not irreducible. It's not reducible.
Yeah, it has solely its identity. It doesn't have any parts to it that you can subtract from it, such as powers, such as.
But I'm sorry, I'm very busy. That's why I keep on going away. I'll be right back.
Okay, we can resume this later, but I don't think we're really making progress. So I'll just say to the call then. The way that this works is because it's divinely simple and it's not pulling on properties from it tied itself. The issue is because it doesn't have like the power or the knowledge associated usually with things like omniscience, omnipotence, and other properties associated with the singular entity, then at that point it can't create things such as a composite entity, and because of that, that must not be the first cause, because as he pointed out, we have composite entities today like trees. That's as simple as it is. I'm gonna go in a second if he doesn't come back, because I have to go somewhere, but that's pretty much as simple as it is. If anyone disagree with me in chat? What topic did you make against One Piece King? I never debated One Piece King.
I disagree, Moose. I disagree.
Why?
'Cause you're right!
I'm helping out my little sister, that's why.
You want to come back later?
I think you just said a while ago that this conversation was not going anywhere, but we can just like repeat our points and see if we're gonna agree with that.
Yeah, we can conclude. It's fine. Oh, he's gone again. Okay, well, we're gonna conclude, guys, just so you know. In conclusion, he agreed that a fundamental thing cannot be the initial first cause already as a simple thing. I don't even know why we're so debating. I think we all heard him agree, right? Didn't he say that the initial thing can't be simple?
I wasn't actually going to accidentally mute my mic. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make your conclusion?
But yeah, what were you saying?
Yeah, so I remember.
Yeah, you can go first.
Sure. So I'm pretty sure you agreed at one point. We can look back at the recording if you disagree. That something that is initially simple cannot create composite objects because it has no power, and because of that, and we see composite objects around us. Obviously, that thing must not be simple.
Okay, so the thing is that so you're saying that for a metaphysically irreducible thing to create something else like a composite object, it requires, I guess, power. Like it requires more properties than just it being itself. And I was saying to you that for one, if we don't fully understand the causal process or the causal nexus between this metaphysically irreducible thing, for example, and these other composite objects that we see in our everyday life, then I don't think arguing upon the actual process, like the ontological process between this, or just clarify, just simplify what I'm saying. I don't think us arguing about the process which causes this metaphysical irreducible thing to create composite objects is relevant. What I think we can focus on is whether this thing, if it were to be explained only by unified objects, and I'm talking about other unified objects, if unified objects were to only be explained by unified objects, then that would actually establish that there's no actual sufficient reason for these unified objects to be unified object. Now, I think we're maybe arguing past each other, because I don't think, you may think I'm not directly attacking your arguments, and I don't think you're directly attacking my argument or syllogism as to why these unified objects under your worldview could have not been unified objects if they were to be only explained by unified objects, because what that entails is an infinite hierarchy of like causes and so on. You can respond if you think I'm like rambling for too long. I don't want to like shock on you or anything, right?
No, it's fine. I think I basically already went against everything you concluded with there. I don't think I have anything new to bring up. Like we went over what's the definition?
I don't think I have anything new to bring up either. I think I did not refute the actual arguments on the table. It just like it appeals like this mathematical example or whatever. But I guess that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's it. Does anyone else want to say anything before we conclude? Actually, that doesn't even make sense. I don't know why I said that. You want to run polls, or you want to give this to somebody?
Wait, what you said?
Would you like to run polls, or would you like to give this recording to somebody?
We can give the recording to somebody.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.